This is Keys to the Shop, episode 331, The 7 Deadly Sins of My Career. Well, hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFirio. I'm your host for the show, and I am very thankful to have you along today. If you're just new to the show, you're in for a treat. There's a lot of cool episodes with awesome guests, both mostly in the coffee industry, but also experts and thought leaders and authors from outside the coffee industry. All of them are brought in for interviews, and we do one-on-one topical discussions of things that will help you grow as a coffee entrepreneur, as a coffee shop professional. And I really am excited to have you introduced to the show. And I would really encourage all of you, whether you're new or you're a seasoned listener, to subscribe to Keys to the Shop. Just hit subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and also leave a rating or review. A 5-star rating would be awesome over at Apple Podcasts. And the best way to help the show, of course, is to share it with your team, with your friends, your family, anybody who you think can benefit from the content of this show. It would be awesome to do that, and that's how we'll spread the word about Keys to the Shop. Thank you, everybody. And now I want to let you know that on top of doing this podcast, Keys to the Shop also does consulting. And what Keys to the Shop consulting looks like is you getting to work directly with me to help you level up your operations, people, and quality of your cafe through remote consultation, in-person assessments, and trainings. And this is for those of you who are just getting into the space of coffee entrepreneurship, or those of you who are currently operators who need refinement in your systems or help scaling your business, or just problem solving and getting clarity on the next phase of your business. There's a lot of ways that Keys to the Shop consulting can help you. I would love to explore that with you. Just email chris@keystotheshop.com for a free discovery call and find out if working with Keys to the Shop Consulting is right for you. Again, that email for Keys to the Shop Consulting, chris@keystotheshop.com. Now, today's episode of Keys to the Shop is brought to you by the Ground Control Cyclops Brewer. And I think when we use the phrase, this is something I believe in, quote unquote, sometimes we can be a little bit loose in this. But because I know the people behind this equipment, I've tasted the difference it makes on people's coffee bars for the quality of the coffee, for the operations of the business, I can truly say that I believe in this product because the evidence is there. It unlocks the potential of your coffee. It levels up the coffee quality experience for your customers. And that's thanks to the SCA award-winning technology that gives you control over an unheard of range of flavors. It is truly unique. It's got an amazing design. And on top of all this, it's also giving you a lot of efficiency on bar because it can make tea, batched iced lattes, and batched cold brew. As the summer is coming upon us, this kind of thing you want to take a look at for sure. So find out more information over at groundcontrol.coffee. If you want to level up the quality of your coffee and the efficiency of your coffee bar and look great doing it, then I think the Ground Control Cyclops Brewer might be right for you. So check them out again over at groundcontrol.coffee. Today's episode is also brought to you by the world's leader in plant-based performance beverage goodness. Of course, that's the Barista series from Pacific. They are champions of barista culture, and it shows in the products that they create. The entire line of plant-based beverages from the Barista series are created with a barista in mind and with a ton of feedback from the barista community before it's launched. And so you know that they've done their research, and they know this is going to stand up to the heat from steaming, produce awesome texture for latte art in your beverages, and the beverage quality itself is focused on the coffee. It's a great balance, and your customers are really going to be astounded by the quality that the Barista series brings to their daily latte, cappuccino, or any other plant-based beverage that they enjoy. So go to pacificfoodservice.com to learn more and get this in your store. Try it for yourself. If you really want to serve your customers the best plant-based beverages, then it has to be the Barista series from Pacific. Okay, everybody. Well, today I am going to get vulnerable with you. We are going to open up about the 7 deadly sins of my career. So the 7 deadly sins, I have so much time to reflect on things. That one of the benefits of having a podcast is you're constantly thinking about content, and you're drawing content from either the world around you and what you've experienced right now, like topics that are relevant to this time in coffee, or you're drawing content from guests who come on the show and want to hear their experiences and their perspectives, and creating content that will help others either build on that success or avoid those mistakes. And this is going to be an avoid those mistakes kind of episode. It's not just things that I've done wrong in like we all make mistakes kind of way. It's things that I think have really either held me back or caused undue stress or harm to either myself or those around me, my career, things like that. And if you go long enough in coffee, you're going to have a little list of your own. And I hope it doesn't get up to 7, but it kind of worked out really well for naming this episode. So now where we want to start with this, I think, is something that maybe it's not just me that experiences this, but it's also every barista in some sense. Unless you're just starting out with humility, you're probably going to start out with arrogance. I know I did. There was a lot of bluster. I had a lot of passion for coffee, and that passion for coffee made me really high on my own opinion of myself, which means that I'm not really open to feedback. And in fact, I would take feedback the wrong way, or I would think that I have all the answers. And when you're so young in coffee and you're excited, you can mistake that excitement and conviction that you have for like a righteous cause. And we see this a lot with the industry where, people get into it on a particular issue or a set of parameters where they say, if you don't do these things with your espresso, then you're not making real espresso. Or if you have this in your coffee bar, you don't have a real, third wave coffee bar or something like that. And I used to be like that. And I think that I'm not going to say that it's necessary for everybody to go through, but I wish I had come face to face with my own arrogance sooner. And it took a couple of times of really just putting my foot in my mouth and, hurting people around me and making them uncomfortable and cutting off opportunities for advancement within roles because of my lack of approachability, and not because I was trying to push people away, but I was just so concrete in everything I was saying, but at the same time, very inexperienced. And over time, you're going to find out that what you thought was concrete is actually flexible. I used to train people on the bar a certain way with a distribution technique, north, south, east, west. I had special steps that you had to make espresso by, and it was based on the information we had at the time, and I was so convinced of it. And I had no room in my vocabulary for anything else. I remember, because I was into latte art and I was a latte art champion, I was just kind of high on my opinion of myself, to when somebody who I respect sold latte art. And they sold it to McDonald's in Japan, and I saw the advertisement. And remember, this is when latte art was really the sign for specialty coffee. As funny as that sounds now, but back then, nobody was doing latte art. And when you saw it, it was almost like this beacon of hope that maybe there's quality coffee. And so to see it on the side of a truck in Japan, and it was a design that I had actually invented, which sounds totally weird to say, but people make up different techniques and things. And I was very possessive of those types of designs. I was livid. Why was I livid? Why? Because I was arrogant, because I was selfish and prideful. And I put up a blog post and I named it Latte Art Prostitution. And I wrote this blog about it. Now, am I being others focused? Am I being people first in the way that I was approaching things? No, I was being Chris first. And I was being my opinion first. And people want to hear from me, and here's my venom out there about this thing. And I got called out on it basically by the industry. And it was really embarrassing. So I apologized to the person who it was referring to, and that was so long ago, and it was really embarrassing to do. But I felt very righteous in typing it out. I had no filter back then because the only perspective I had was my own. The same thing happened when I was with latte art. I won a competition, and I thought that the people who were at the competition didn't sufficiently cheer for me or support me or happy for me. And so I wrote a blog post about it. Well, these people, they were actually reading my blog. They were fans of my blog. And they read that I was, kind of incensed at this. And I had to talk to the owner of the company that a lot of these baristas worked for and apologize for basically throwing them under the bus. For what? For not congratulating me, for being, I threw this self-pity party. So that's the first of the deadly sins of my career, was really allowing that arrogance and pride and self-righteousness to guide so much of what I did and thought about in the first years of my coffee career. And thankfully, I've been able to mature past that. It's not what it was. We all struggle with these types of things throughout our entire lives, but back then it was really palpable and definitely an impediment to my success in coffee and my development as a person. So that's the first one, is arrogance. And now the second one is being overbearing, which is a function of arrogance in a sense, but it's a very specific kind of action that really makes people feel like they are under a crushing weight of expectation and judgment. And that's what happened to me when I was a trainer, where I would come into the rush with a clipboard and, watch people work and write down notes. I mean, I wouldn't blame anybody if they were balling up their fists and ready to punch me in the midst of, that kind of a display of, just not reading the room and not getting it, But I did it because I was the trainer and I had competition experience and I have to train people. And the best time to get feedback on how they're doing is during a rush. And it was just the way that I conducted myself, where I didn't take into account the context of people's lives. I didn't have empathy. I didn't consider what people were going through, how receptive they were to what I was saying, or how approachable I was as a person to their feedback. So by and large, I was very overbearing, and I had too many expectations of people, because rather than, designing my guidance or coaching or feedback around a specific person's need or a specific cafe's need, I just saw the ideal in my head, and I saw people not matching up to the ideal. And so I said, well, I'm going to basically force everyone around me to focus everyone. We want to be good in coffee, right? Okay, so let's do this, right? And it's calling into question people's motives too. That's another part of being overbearing, is that you're saying the only way to be good at coffee is to do things my way. Well, that's, back to arrogance, that's kind of like the epitome of immaturity. And so I didn't really have room for flexibility, and therefore I was rigid with the way that I applied my authority, and I was overbearing. In training, I was overbearing in management on several occasions. I had a manager once who was crying in my office because of my lack of approachability. And my job as the one who was in charge of this manager was to be able to enter into her world and see where she had need and create the culture of approachability and feedback culture. And when these things happen, when I got somebody who made a formal complaint against my training methods, or somebody who cries in your office, it breaks up this cycle that you're going through as a person, that blinds you and it deafens you to the obvious signs that you're doing something wrong. And occasionally something will happen where you're just shaken out of the stupor of your own overbearing authority to see yourself the way you really are, and it's shocking. And thankfully for me, on several occasions, it shocked me into a place where I was more receptive to adjust the way that I approached things, the way I thought about things, my mindset, and the way I set my heart towards people in the business and my goals. There's a lot of self-awareness and soul-searching that has to happen, especially when you're in authority. And that wasn't really part of the way that I operated in the beginning. And now today, I'm way more cognizant of, where's this information going? Who is it for? What's the context? Make it serve people. And this is why I harp on it so much, everyone. This is why I'm so focused on being people-focused, and the content has this through line in it, is because I've lived the opposite in my own career, and I've received the opposite also. I've had my fair share of overbearing bosses and arrogant bosses, and maybe I could say that in some way, it's like that old commercial where the guy finds his son smoking a joint. He said, "Where'd you get this? Who taught you how to do this?" "You all right? I learned it from watching you." So maybe there's an element there where you can learn some behavior, but I will not use that as a scapegoat. We all have in us the ability, it's native to us, to generate toxicity and overbearing authority, arrogance, all of these things. So we can't just say, oh, it's my context or my immediate bosses and all this other stuff. It's probably you, just like it was me for sure. So that's the second one, is being overbearing. I could have done way more to serve my staff and accomplished more in the places where I worked if I had addressed this sooner and I was more open to it. So my hope for you is that the introspection that you might feel like launching into after this will help you come face to face with these things in your own life. So number 3 on the list of 7 deadly sins from my career is taking it personally. When we get feedback from people around us about how we can do better, how I used to interpret it is that they were saying, "You're bad. You're doing terrible. We're frustrated with you. We reject you. You're a bad person." And that's not what they said. It's hard for us to actually hear what people are saying at face value without creating some kind of a background implication. That's especially true today with social media, when the arguments that we have around subjects where we sort of fill in the gaps of nuance with some of the worst assumptions about people. And in our careers, when we get feedback from bosses or coworkers, or as bosses from our staff and our peers, it's easy for us to sort of slough it off and say, well, first of all, consider the source. You've got your own problems, and then don't you see all the good stuff that I do? Why aren't you talking about that? And all the while, we're just ducking and dodging and doing gymnastics to avoid the thing that we know is true. We just know it's true. We don't want it to be true in that conversation. We reject the messenger. And you know what? When we reject the messenger because they don't qualify as somebody who we want to receive information from, we reject the information too. So whether it comes to you in the form of, a white dove from the clouds, or somebody who you're frankly not a big fan of, but they're right, you have to receive it if you want to advance. You're really rejecting a gift when you're rejecting feedback. And when you take it personally, you can't really apply it professionally. No, there's lots of things that happen where there are personal affronts to us. There are toxic situations. Every industry that, as a caveat, of course, there's a line that can be crossed. But I know that in my own career, there was no lines crossed when people had critique about my work on the bar or the way that I was managing or things like that. But in my mind, I had constructed an image of myself that justified my lack. And therefore, when they came up against my justifications, I was already practiced at rejecting their feedback. I wasn't searching for feedback. I was searching for affirmation. I didn't really have any kind of room for critical feedback. And when you build your career, and I think it could be argued that we've built an industry a little bit on the assumption that, communication you do receive from those within the industry is supposed to be affirmation and not critique. We take it personally and we become very defensive. Think about feedback and critique that might be helpful to bring out the best in you as the hot water in brewing. The first thing that happens in brewing coffee often is degassing. There's just trapped gas in there. And when there's a lot of gas, that bloom, and you don't account for this, your brewing is not going to be very good because the gas is pushing the water away. It's not extracting properly. It's not stable. And that's one of the things that I've done is when that hot water causes this agitation, I push it away as I'm 43 now, I'm a little bit more aged out, if you will. I'm a little bit more degassed these days, if you get what I mean. Uh, but I can receive it better, and it can extract good things from me a little bit more readily than when I was younger, and I had that arrogance and overbearing attitude that made me take it personally, and I said, no, boom, push that away instead of let it extract from me the goodness that was in there. And, who knows? My career could have developed differently if I had allowed myself to be developed more by those around me who were, whether or not they intended it to be, offering me the gift of feedback that I was rejecting by taking it personally. So let's move on to number 4 of the 7 deadly sins of my career, and that is not listening to my boss. And I will say in particular, not making the priorities of the person who pays my paycheck my priorities. Especially, I guess it doesn't matter where you are in the chain of command of a coffee bar, if you're a barista or a manager or whatever. It's really incumbent upon you to find out what the expectations are of your immediate boss and make those your priority. Instead, what I found myself doing a lot, especially because I was plugged into the industry where there's just this variety, this cornucopia of projects and information and stuff, and there's my boring old coffee shop, and they're not doing these things, and I read this stuff in a book and that stuff in a book. I'm going to do these things. I'm going to spend my time focusing on and prioritizing, trying to wedge my own agenda into whatever space I can, given whatever authority I have, rather than using that position that I actually agreed to take. I agreed to take this position. I agreed to, do the work that was in the job description. But all of a sudden, I forget exactly what was in that job description. What was it that I was supposed to do? Oh, that's right. Make up stuff. I was supposed to make up my own projects and get tired out with my righteous side projects and then get frustrated when people were calling me to account for late schedules or basics that needed to be covered. It's not like my side projects didn't have value. It's just that I had my values crossed. I was having like shiny object syndrome. I spent some years on a medication for ADD when I was a kid, and so maybe that's a manifestation of that. But the point is that I knew at a certain point what I was doing. I had the wherewithal, the physical ability, the mental ability to spend my energy, my best energies, making sure that I was delivering excellence in the areas that were the basics and the expectations of my bosses. And I just didn't do it. When I was called to the mat for it and saying, why aren't these things getting done? I was, I'm busy at this thing and that thing. And I was like, why can't they see the value of what I'm doing with these projects over here? I really should have been surprised that they let me do those projects at all without calling me to the mat sooner. So not listening to your boss, not prioritizing the things that you've been hired to do, you can't forget who writes the paychecks in the business. And that's your first order. So if it's the schedule, if it's inventory, one-on-ones, whatever is in that job description, even if it's not clear, you have to be proactive in gaining clarity in order to make sure that your priorities are straight. Because if you want to see success with a side project or something that you think is going to bring value, that's something creative that you bring to the table, the first thing that's going to be thought about is, are they doing the basics? And if you're not listening to your boss, if you're not making their priorities your priorities as their employee, then you're just setting yourself up for frustration, bitterness, angst, failure, all that stuff. All things that I've experienced in my career, and definitely stuff that I don't want you to experience. So that's number 4. Now, number 5 takes a little bit of a break from the relationships that you have within the business. In the 7 deadly sins of my career is my physical health. Number 5 is my physical health. Not watching out for how I was taking care of my body as I was taking care of other people and taking care of their needs for coffee. I was not taking care of my own physical needs. You can also call this self-care, personal maintenance, whatever it is. There has to be some kind of a purposeful and regular care that you take for your mind and body, or else this job will consume you. watching out for what you consume and eat, during a shift. If you're only eating pastries, not drinking water and drinking tons of coffee, and then you have, panic attacks. I'm putting my hand up in the air right now, a history of panic attacks over the course of the last, I don't know if it's 20 years, but like 15 years or so. A lot of it, talking specifically about me, was I just was not healthy. I was not paying attention to what I was putting in my body. I was just eating whatever was expedient. I was ignoring certain warning signs. And there's this kind of perverse sense that you get, like, oh, I'm in the fraternity of people who can do that. Like, we're hustling, we're not sleeping. It's kind of like that entrepreneur attitude that people have where they're just working until 3:30 a.m. and that's supposed to make you better. But all of a sudden they have a nervous breakdown. So I got sick way more than I should have. I got tired and got panic attacks, and I became, there was a time in my life, maybe about 6 years ago or so now, that I was 40 pounds heavier. And I wish that I had taken the time to exercise, eat right, drink water, prioritize sleep, watch the kind of foods that I was eating during, between shifts or before or after shifts, that kind of stuff. And today, I know that, for instance, my right hand has some dormant tendinitis or carpal tunnel or whatever it is that will flare up every now and again because of just the ridiculous non-ergonomic things I was doing on the bar back in the early 2000s. I have a bad back that can flare up because of the way that I was reaching for milk, day after day, year after year. Instead of squatting, I was picking it up using my, just bending over and picking it up and that kind of thing. I know that my coffee consumption and the consumption of too much sugar and not enough water contributed to my anxiety issues over the past number of years. And I know this because now I'm in a better place and I've taken care of my body a lot more and my mind a lot more, giving myself peace, meditating, breathing exercises, all of that stuff. There's a huge and vast world of self-care and mind-body solutions out there. It's just consistent application of those things and discipline to not just do what's expedient, but do what's going to have long-term benefit for you. Even if it's not the tastiest, I can tell you that eventually that stuff will catch up with you. Even if you feel invincible now as a young person in coffee, that's going to get old. That's not going to last. And now is the time to start making plans to care for who you're going to become later based on the habits you have now. So that was number 5 is, poor health. And, I wish I was looking out for that earlier in my career. Now, on to number 6 of the 7 deadly sins in my career, overwork. We've talked about this in the episode when going above and beyond goes too far, and maybe mentioned it in a few other management management-focused episodes. Overwork happens a lot with people who feel real kind of loyalty to their business. Some people feel a real coaxed loyalty. They feel like if they don't say yes to covering a shift, they're going to get fired or they're going to be thought of as less. Managers think this a lot when they have to not only cover shifts, but they have to be there all the time to make sure things are going well, and they overcommit themselves to projects. We just say yes too much, Maybe because in hospitality, we tend to be people pleasers. And we're sensitive to other people's opinions about us. And so we want to hedge our bets and make sure that we're just doing a bunch of things just in case, right? This comes down to the self-care issue, of course, where you're not budgeting your time. You're not confident in saying no or having clear expectations drawn for your job. And so you just say yes to all this stuff. And I was working as a manager, not the owner of the place, but the manager, 70, 75-hour weeks for months on end, not seeing my family and my wife. And it is not good for your relationships. And you have to think to yourself, why are you doing this? Is it necessary for you to do this? For me, I thought it was necessary because I was trying to justify my paycheck, right? I felt guilty for having a higher paycheck than, some baristas or whatever, or the owner that, hired me. And so I had to work all these hours but I wasn't the owner of the business. Now, if you're an owner and you're working 70 hours, 75 hours a week, sometimes that's necessary in the beginning. It's not something that you should sustain, but that's kind of what you signed up for because it is your asset. When you hire people, though, sometimes we expect them to sort of become surrogate owners. That's not the same as taking ownership. That's not when you say taking ownership over a job, we don't mean act like an owner and work like an owner. People should just be expected to work the job that they are hired to do and do very well in that. Again, you can listen to the episode when Going Above and Beyond Goes Too Far for more information on that. But for me, I was overworked. And I had no sense in which I was accomplishing or pleasing the people that I was working for. I was just trying to do everything so at least they could see that I was passionate. I was doing all this stuff, and it didn't do anything except make me tired, damage my relationships, and frustrate me and create bitterness and confusing emotions in me. And so I would say, in order to avoid that, I would say demanding clear expectations for what the job entails, how many hours, and finding solutions for how that's going to be maintained. Watch out for what you say yes to here. If you're a manager and you sign up to cover shifts for sick baristas, and that's part of your job description, you've obligated yourself to do that. But you don't obligate yourself as the manager to do things like favors and chores that are outside your job description for the owner of the business. And I've heard some really weird things where people are running personal errands for owners because, we're like a family here and all this stuff. Okay, so we have to keep things professional. And if it's not being kept professional for you by the people who have hired you, you've got to make it happen for yourself, or try your best to find some other place to work that's going to respect boundaries. But you have to set boundaries for yourself. If you're a boss, you got to make sure that you're the one who brings up the issue of boundaries. Because sometimes if the employee is the one who has to bring it up, they're going to resent the fact that they have to bring it up. It should be the people in authority who create the policies and expectations to think about the boundaries, to set up the expectations in such a way that people don't become overworked. And so for me, it was a matter of insecurity, and I overworked myself in order to justify a paycheck or a position. And I wish I had been a little bit more confident and also planned a little bit better for exactly what I was expected to do week to week. Done it very well. And of course, I'm going to come in clutch when needed, but I was just all over the place with my work in hopes that it was going to please somebody. And then I became all over the place just internally. So overworking myself is number 6 on that list of 7 deadly sins. And the final one I'm going to talk about here, we've covered arrogance, being overbearing, taking it personally, not listening to my boss and not making their priorities mine, being in poor health or not watching out for my health, overwork, and then finally, passive education or passivity in my approach to how I was going to develop as a professional. What I used to think going into a job was that what I was going to learn would be provided for me. Rather than getting what I could from the position, I wanted them to give me all I needed from the position. And the people who work in a business are responsible for lots of different things. And there's only so much professional development that you're going to get as a barista, as a manager, before it becomes impractical for the company to invest in you further. We have limits, okay? But there's endless lessons that you can learn personally as you mature from a new manager to a seasoned manager, from a new barista to a seasoned barista. That's not stuff that you can actually expect somebody else to give you. It's stuff that you have to pay attention to as it happens and then write it down and reflect on it and really pay attention to and be mindful of the things that you're learning as you go. Not necessarily only the things that you're being taught. There's a big difference. Things you're learning are going to outnumber the things that you're being taught every time. When I say taught, I mean somebody else sitting you down and saying, okay, fact, apply it here. Here's a framework for management. Here's a workflow for a 2-person bar. You're going to get that stuff for sure. But that's not the end of your education. In fact, that's not even really the tip of the iceberg of your education. I took a real passive approach, and I expected the company to sort of fill my needs. I expected to walk out of a company afterwards being way more seasoned than I ended up being because I was just being too passive with my own education and development. You could learn more about being a great barista by working in a very bad coffee bar with terrible quality practices, management, leadership, all this stuff is just like, wow, it's really subpar. You can learn more from that when you approach it mindfully and you're paying attention to the lessons that you're learning, that you're observing, that you're going through, than you can from a place where everything is top tier, excellent, and you're just taking it for granted. The difference is mindfulness. The difference is personal application. And the episode, The Sleepwalking Barista, addresses this. And that was me for years, where I know that I was asleep at the wheel. I was just going into a shift. I was going out of the shift. I don't know. I was just doing stuff. I don't care what happened. I made coffee. Who cares? All the development that's going to happen with me is going to happen when I go to competition or when I go to Coffee Fest or when I have development time. Well, the actual development happens when you're not paying attention. And if you can pay attention to it, you can take advantage of that a lot more. And so that was the last one I wanted to mention, and it's something I think we could all do better in, is making sure that we're not being passive with our education and that we're taking advantage of all our experiences along the way. The good, the bad, don't take it for granted. Reflect on it and make it useful to you in some way as you develop. You're going to be thankful you did years down the line. And there won't be these like large blank spaces in your career where you're just like, geez, I don't know what happened there, but I certainly wasn't awake to the possibilities or to the lessons. I just kind of got through it. So this is some of the stuff that I've been through in my career. And after 22 years of working in coffee, I'm sure there's a lot more that we could talk about. But I figured these 7 things are top-level mistakes that I've made over the course of my time in coffee. And they happen to be things that I think a lot of you out there in coffee have some experience in as well, and maybe are struggling with at this moment. My encouragement to you is try to come face to face with these issues as soon as you possibly can and correct course. You're going to be glad that you did it earlier than later, for sure. So I hope that this was helpful for everybody. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback about this episode or any episode of Keys to the Shop, feel free to email me, chris@keystotheshop.com. And that's also where you can reach me for Keys to the Shop consulting, chris@keystotheshop.com. And I would encourage you all also, if you're interested in developing yourself, speaking of development, and your team, and really immersing yourself in an environment where people are genuinely trying to get better and get good information to produce excellent coffee experiences, you can look no further than Coffee Fest trade shows. Go to coffeefest.com and you'll see all the shows coming up. The soonest one is in March in New York City, then Chicago, then Los Angeles, and Seattle. And in 2022, you can get 50% off your registration by using the code KEYS when you go to sign up over at coffeefest.com. This is really the best trade show and event you could go to develop yourself as a retail professional in coffee. The lectures, the workshops, the trainings, they're all either free or accessibly priced, and they have world-class experts teaching these things. You get so much out of it, including the trade show floor, the competitions like latte art and cold brew, and of course the community of people, like-minded professionals getting together to do coffee well. Go check it out now and sign up today. Use the code KEYS for all the shows in 2022 to get 50% off your registration. coffeefest.com. And with that, everyone, it is the end of the episode. Thank you so much for taking time to listen to me talk about my mistakes in my career, my 7 deadly sins. I hope it was helpful to you. Again, if you have any questions, simply reach out. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at Keys to the Shop. Subscribe to the show, share it with a friend. And as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.